Hello and welcome to another Mental Wealth Moves podcast. It's been a while since I've jumped on here. I think my last recorded episode was hanging out with my mom, and that was a blast. We had a great time, talked about a bunch of different things. So today I just wanted to check in, talk about kind of the latest and greatest with everything going on in psychedelicatry, aka ego dissolution for mental health and wellness. An increasing amount of people, including Brian Johnson, are talking about longevity implications of ego dissolution. And the etiology isn't completely understood, which is really interesting because there are lots of hypotheses. And most people are right and most people are wrong in certain aspects, I imagine. So we at Revitalize Clinics, we really emphasize the need for integration. What happens after the ketamine treatment? You get this snow globe shaking, and then what do we do with that neuroplasticity? I've had people talk about traumatic events that transpire during their induction series, which is those 6 infusions over that period of 3 weeks, and how they felt to some extent that was deleterious, that was damaging to their forward progress because they were unable to fully take advantage of the neuroplasticity. And in fact, they may have taken advantage of the neuroplasticity in a negative fashion, where the world is even hardlined as an unsafe place. And that's often something I caution people against. If I'm telling you to let those walls down, ego dissolution, right? What is that ego that's built to protect us? What often happens is those walls that we build to protect us, that fortress, it ends up turning into a prison. And it really ends up keeping us imprisoned. If you think of that Will Ferrell movie, Anchorman, I'm in a steel cage of emotion, right? And sometimes people really feel like that. Oftentimes people feel like that, especially when they're coming into our clinics, right? They've tried the normal rigmarole of mental health. People have been entrenched in the system often for decades before they come to Revitalize Clinics. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. Most psychiatric diagnoses are really coping strategies for past trauma. So withdrawing ourselves from the tribe, depression, withdrawal, that's designed to protect us. At some point, that every plate was hot. And so you develop generalized anxiety disorder because there's a lot of anxiety producing stimuli that you're exposed to on a daily basis. And so substance use disorder, right? We're checking out. I like to think with ego dissolution agents, we're checking in. You're checking into your reality. And that being said, you're zoomed out while you're doing it, right? It's kind of how EMDR can be more helpful is you're not really talking about and reliving. You can't be your past trauma. And the 3 tenets of our treatment here at Revitalize Clinics: one, name it to tame it, right? Everything falls from trauma. Everything is a coping strategy for trauma. 2, feel it to heal it. And that's what ketamine, the other ego dissolution agents, do an incredible job of. And 3, ultimately making that internal narrative shift from this happened to me to this happened for me. So are we glad that all this trauma happened in our upbringing? Because that trauma happened, are we who we are today? Yes. And do we have a choice to love ourselves every minute of every day? Yes. And should you make that choice to love yourself? Yes. And are we all works in progress? Yes. And so is there always room for improvement? Yes. And is sometimes the best version of integration laying in bed all day and not doing anything? Yes, also to that too. I don't think anything is inherently good or bad. The dose makes the medicine and the dose makes the poison. So I don't think anyone should regularly drink alcohol. Did I drink alcohol in excess in my younger days? Yes. Did it cause me emotional distress and put other people in my life through hardship? Absolutely. Do I feel great about that? No. Am I glad that I did that because I am who I am now? Yes. I needed to go through those lessons so I can hold space for other people better. And always say in mental health, it takes one to know one. And so when you've gone through and you've done your own work, that is reflected in how you are able to hold space for other people. So yeah, I had a lot that I went through in my early days. And being able to go through that and being able to learn from that. And I'm talking early days, like 5 minutes ago, Casey, right? I said dumb things before. I've made stupid comments. I've said less than tactful or empathic types of statements that hurt people. And do I feel good about that? Absolutely not. Because I did that, I am who I am now. And that radical authenticity, that ability to be that most real version of yourself is the best gift that you can give the universe. What happens with ego dissolution agents is they let your walls down safely, ideally. And those walls are what we build to protect ourselves. Again, for some people, it's depression. For some people, it's anxiety. For some people, it's substance use disorder. It's kind of a ladder. Again, as we open up our toolbox of coping strategy mechanisms, hopefully on the top of your toolbox and my toolbox are healthy coping strategies, right? Like petting an animal, going outside, going for a walk, listening to music, journaling, cold plunging, saunaing, physical activity, uh, dancing. And then when those things don't work, we go to our less healthy coping strategies, right? We start withdrawing. We start thinking that the world is an unsafe place. Borderline personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, substance use disorder. I call those bipolar light. Bipolar 2, 4 days or less of sleeping, 4 hours of sleep or less with increased goal directed activity, potentially high risk, high reward. Bipolar 1, 7 days of that kind of behavior with an inpatient hospitalization and behavioral health unit. And, some people are probably bipolar 1 and they're the movers and shakers of this world. They're the Elon Musks and uh, the Mark Zuckerbergs and Oprah Winfrey's and other people that put their physiological needs on the back burner so that they can create some rad stuff. And so your strengths will always be your strengths. Your weaknesses will always be your weaknesses. Recognizing that and honing your strengths and farming out your weaknesses is the best thing that you can do for the universe, in my opinion. Remember, what's good for you is good for the universe. That being said, the right kind of selfishness where you're taking care of yourself, you're filling your cup up enough that you have some to give. I like to think of relationships in regards and as like bank accounts, basically. And you think of relationships with deposits and withdrawals. Deposits and withdrawals. If you're in some relationships and there's nothing but withdrawals in those relationships, especially during times of healing, I highly recommend mitigating those relationships and taking that time, take that safe space for yourself. Brene Brown, I love that book, Rising Strong. It's in our integration workbook as a book recommendation list. And she talks about living big as an acronym. B is boundaries, what's okay to be treated like and what's not. I is coming at it with integrity, knowing that you want the best for yourself and you want the best for everyone else. And G is being generous of your expectations of where other people are coming from with their own trauma. I like to say we all bring our own trauma into every interaction, and it encapsulates our view of the world. And so, that being said, just because someone else is having a crummy life, that doesn't mean you should let down your boundaries. And so, often our first bullies are our parents, needlessly so, and or they're doing the best they can with what they have. Am I a perfect dad? No. Am I perfectly imperfect? Yes. I don't think, again, I think everyone is a work in progress. And I think that no one is broken. That's very important to say. And it's important for you to hear and anyone else in your life to hear that you are not broken. You're beautifully damaged, right? I like that vase, the Japanese vase thing where sometimes they will intentionally break a vase. I think more often it's when it's more real. The vase gets dropped and it falls down and it gets broken. And the way that they put it back together is really beautiful. They use this gold foil and something else. I don't know the exact mechanistics mechanics. I don't know exactly what substrate or substance that they're using. It looks like gold. I think they can use platinum. I think they're using easily moldable types of things to seal those cracks and to put that vase back together. And so just know that even though if you feel totally broken, totally just worthless, useless, you are not. You were born into this life a winner. You chose to be here to some extent, right? It doesn't feel like it in subconscious spirituality kind of thing. It's a deeper dive that I'm going to do right now. And think about what you needed to go through to get here, right? So your dad had millions and millions and billions and trillions potentially of swimmers that went down the drain, did not meet an egg, and then your mom has what an egg a month for 40 years or 30 years, something like that, and those are not normally fertilized; they're normally lost once a month, right? And so thinking about that and thinking about what the odds were for you to be born into this existence to be able to listen to me now, wow, you are a winner. You are the best possible genetic material of ancestors from who knows how long. And so that's awesome. Congratulate yourself and tell your parents thanks too. That is amazing that you're here now listening to this, that you have ears, that you were able to skin your knee at some point, that you're able to feel love or connection with another human, that you can feel it, what it feels like when you pinch your skin, or when you rub yourself, or when you get a massage, or when you hear a beautiful melody, when you feel elation and love and connection, when you have that first bite of a delicious meal when you're starving, when you're able to put your feet in the sand, when you're able to feel the sun on your face, when you're able to survive something really difficult, right? Like a cold plunge or heartbreak, and you come back from that. That's awesome. That's why we're here. That's what we get to experience. And we get to help other people. And the best gift you can give someone else is your presence. The best present you can ever give is your presence. And what's good for you is good for the universe. Remember that. So as you are remembering, as you are on this walk of life, this journey of wellness, we all want to get to the top of the mountain, right? And we're all trying our best and climbing and scurrying and keeping up with the Joneses. It's important to stop. My friend Eric, he says it really well. Uh, it's important to stop every 50 or 100 yards as you're climbing up this mountain. And take a look, like stop and be like, hey, wow, look at me. Look how far I made it. Look what I've done. Look how much I've accomplished. Look how many lives I've touched, right? Look what I've done for myself. And look how much of a survivor I am, right? Good job, me. Because if you're just always trucking and always trying and doing all these things, showing up to therapy and doing all this self-help work, I tell you like a little secret, I've read hundreds of self-help books at this point now, so I can cultivate a really strong list of kind of self-help books. And my buddy Brandon says it really well. where you see overlap is where you see the truth. And every one of them says the same thing. Uh, take care of yourself, take care of others, be physically well, sleep, enjoy yourself, be smart, be kind, be nice, listen, and be a good human. Enjoy yourself. When you take care of yourself, you're able to give more. And it's about remembering. I say it in the book, we're born remembering, we forget along the way, and our job is to remember again. And I just love that. And that's what ego dissolution does. It was a long lead up. And so there was a study that just came out, or a big piece of news. I'm connected with a group of incredible humans that are creating rad things. I have some wonderful friends that also are doing work similar to what we do at Revitalize Clinics. Rising tide raises all ships, right? And so I view myself as an interventional psychiatrist or interventional psychiatry provider. I'm a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner. That's my official title. I've been in healthcare since 2004. I worked in the ICU, CVICU, pre-op and PACU. In the ICU, like I loved what I get to do. At a certain point, though, I felt like a glorified technician. We're titrating vasopressors and we're on an oscillating ventilator, titrating settings, and we're keeping people alive, and that's beautiful. And it's very technician oriented in that, if your stroke volume is this and your cardiac output is this and you have this much circulating blood volume, or then you do this. And if if your ejection fraction is this and you're you know tenuous at best on your arterial line, then you make a change here to your dopamine or uh, your intra-aortic balloon pump and training all that fun stuff. And it was cool. Like I learned continuous renal replacement therapy, like inpatient dialysis, and all this fun stuff. And again, at a certain point, I felt like a technician in that very algorithm based, and in large part, it feels like kind of beating a dead horse. We were a lot of the time, like people were brain dead, and so I really found my love of psychiatry in the ICU because I was able to alleviate some of that burden, some of that really hard feeling that client's loved one was contending with. This is the worst time of their life. Their best friend ever, their mom, their dad, their kid, their spouse, brother, their sister, their favorite human being in the world is in this bed, dead or actively dying. And that's so hard to see, right? It's just heartbreaking. And to be able to be there for that person, that's really what stoked me on that aspect of healthcare, psychiatry. I always felt like it was the last best art in medicine as well, because there's so much nuance to ethical considerations and how a client was raised. Are you doing eye contact? Are you not doing eye contact? How do you greet? Are you shaking hands? Like, what is the best way to reach that client where they're at? Because that's really what it's about. The paternalistic model of medicine and psychiatry uh, should have been passe a long time ago. There's still a lot of people operating in that way of take this and you'll feel better. We know that the monoamine, aka serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine modulation theory is kaput. It's no good. If you're looking at things singularly, in that if someone's depressed and their serotonin is depleted and you falsely create more serotonin, you aren't necessarily helping them long run. Again, nothing's inherently evil or good, right? Dose makes the medicine, dose makes the poison. So if someone is struggling and they've been struggling for a long time, or they're in a situation that they feel like they aren't in a good headspace and they feel like they are. So there's four types of trauma, right? There's your own historical trauma, there's the intergenerational trauma, there's the societal trauma, and then there's the environmental trauma. And so societal, environmental, like that's a lot harder to heal. And that keeps barraging. That's what pushes people back through our doors more than anything. And so if you're married to a butthead and you aren't going to leave that butthead, that's a great, great, great reason to take a daily SSRI or SNRI. Something about your situation stinks and you have no desire to change that aspect of your situation and it's still negatively affecting you. Wonderful. That's a great, great reason to take a daily monoamine modulation agent, aka SSRI, and it would be two monoamines for an SNRI. And then there's a lot of downstream stuff on any of those. And so I just want to caution people that if you are taking the magnifying glass off in that, hey, look, there's a problem. Your body, your mind, your spirit is all telling you, hey, there's a problem. And you decide, hey, like, oh, look at that. It's like, it's not necessarily better than substance use disorder in some ways. And so, yeah, it's prescribed to you. Yeah, it's relatively safe and oversight. And I always tell my clients intelligence and empathy is a deadly combination, right? We hold on to the weight of the world when you understand, when you see more than a lot of people. So evolutionarily, all this stuff happened too quickly. We should be going to sleep with the sun, waking up with the sun, living off the land with like 13 families, where everyone's a cog in the wheel, and that your role is super well appreciated and needed for that tribe to thrive. That gets lost in an economy of scale. So, in general, living in this really connected while we're disconnected world is very hard for an empathic, intelligent person. And I saw that a lot when I was working the inpatient unit at the local hospital and community mental health center. See these people that feel so much, like in their heart of hearts, they feel the weight of the world. They feel pain and suffering across the globe, and you can tell they're holding on to that. And that's exhausting. It's so hard to watch. It's so hard to see, and it's heartbreaking to see these people. And so, uh, in our current evolutionary state, we're able to hold the empathic load of between 120 and 150 people, no more than that. So you walk through Costco, you walk through Sam's Club, you go through Wally World or Safeway, you're exposed to more than that on a daily basis. And so it's no wonder that it's not sustainable, basically. There's a really cool book, Brian Marescu, The Immortality Key, The Secret History of Religion with No Name. That's also in our integration workbook. And he talks about how westernized types of civilization, it's really interesting. This individual has never used any sort of ego dissolution agent, which I think lends more credence to his space to be able to bring this to fruition, this work. And so at the time he penned it, at least he had never done any ego dissolution agent. And he found through the Vatican archives, through other archaeological digs, that on average, human beings used ego dissolution agents similar to ketamine and psilocybin and ergos, phenylalanines, on average about quarterly, about every 3 months or so, a change of the season kind of, in a ceremonial fashion, where they had song and dance and movement and medicine in the afternoon, evening. And then in the morning, they'd break bread and have a circle and talk about things that needed to be talked about. The tribe over there are being buttheads and they're, pushing on our territory and they're overusing the water supply. We need to talk to them. Or, hey, dude, like, this is super rude. You came over, you doing way too much of the, I don't know, whatever their version of whiskey is. And then you're like, you peed on my teepee last night. It's rude. And so having those honest discussions and being able to heal those wounds, and especially in that smaller, tighter knit community, was, again, going on average about every quarter, about every 3 months, from about 12,000 BC-ish to about 1500 AD-ish. And the last real regular usage was in Catalonia, España, in the in Spain, when at that point it was kind of pushed underground in large part by the Catholic Church and the uh, patriarchy. So basically, what part of the reasoning for that, and it's documented in the book, I believe, is that people were seeing God without going to church, which wasn't good for tithing, wasn't good for kind of the power of the church, and so there was a lot of push to not use ego dissolution agents by the patriarchy, by the Catholic Church, and so it was pushed underground. Maria Sabina, uh, you know, oh, this is a sad story. I don't want to belabor every point in there, and basically, psychedelic tourism, the first kind of the start of that, and very deceptive practices by the what was it, Life magazine, I think. Um, some basically, you know, venture capitalist type of person today uh, went over there and had to lie about his daughter being missing, or especially the truth or something. I don't know the full story, or I think, but I don't feel like belaboring all the points on it. And so, kind of simplifying it, basically lied to Maria Sabina and took advantage of her, and then publicized the account, and then lots of other people came, just ostracized by her tribe, and uh, you know, died penniless and ostracized by the people that she cared about the most, her tribe. And so it's sad, and it needed to happen like it did for society to remember. And so I'm not saying that, there's collateral damage is good or bad. I'm just saying it happened. Nothing I can do about it. And if I don't learn from history, I'm doomed to repeat it. So I get this question a lot. Have you done ketamine treatment? What are your, how frequently do you do ketamine treatments? I've never done ketamine treatments. And so it's important to, if we don't learn from this, we're doomed to repeat it, right? And so I've done, some psychedelic tourism. I know what ego dissolution agents feel like. I know what it feels like to get out of your own way. And I do think that there's a lot of medicine to that. A lot of people, including myself, really recognize that there's a lot of room in this type of work for the human optimization side of things. And as a medical practitioner, as a board certified psychiatric provider, it's really important to be able to provide these treatments ethically and legally. The 5 reasons that if everything else was available today, ayahuasca and psilocybin and DMT and 5-MeO-DMT and ibogaine and all the other things, mescaline, peyote, San Pedro, the list goes on. MDMA even as an empathogen, less of a traditional psychedelic. I would still recommend that people start with intravenous ketamine first. And these are the 5 reasons. 1, best bioavailability. So Cybin's working on that. There's a 5-MeO derivative that's going to be intravenous based, my understanding. There's a lot of other things on the market, or not on the market, but coming to market. And ketamine's here now. It's legal. And it's the only version that's being given intravenously with any regularity. So the first reason, best bioavailability. 2, it's honestly the safest. And so there was a paper that came out recently, very low risk of serotonin syndrome with psilocybin, even at heroic macrodosing. And there's still a risk of serotonin syndrome with psilocybin. And there is no risk of serotonin syndrome with ketamine. And that's cool. So people can stay on their antidepressants, right? Last thing we want to do is destabilize these people. Oftentimes people have been on these medications that make it okay for decades, and that's great. But we want people to feel okay. We don't want to pull the carpet out from underneath them before they get started. So we want them to feel slightly better first, and then we can get people off their meds. It's awesome, and not always, right? Like I think less is more when it comes to medications. And again, if you say all or nothing, alcohol's all bad all the time. Like people in the 1500s, like we would not have ancestors. At one point, drinking alcohol was safer than drinking water in multiple water supplies across Europe. So it's built into our DNA that it was a wonderful thing to know how to do. So that being said, I still think it's a poison. I think people should avoid it in large part. And Like, if that's the only way you're going to get out and socialize, if you need some social lubricant to get out there, see your friends, and say hi, and do that, like, do that. And like, that's part of what Rocked is born out of, right? A wellness bar where you can go out and be social and have karaoke and do all these things without it revolving around alcohol use. It's interesting that David Nutt's study out of Cambridge or somewhere in the UK, that the United Kingdom, he did a head to head on kind of all of the substances, and basically the the most dangerous, killing the most people per capita usage, and damaging the most lives, hurting the most people, any sort of substances that can change your brain chemistry, alcohol across the board. Uh, Least dangerous across the board is psilocybin, magic mushrooms, and everything else kind of in between there. All the ego dissolution agents, ketamine included, towards the bottom. Opioids, benzodiazepines towards the top. Benzodiazepines like alprazolam, diazepam, alprazolam, Xanax, diazepam, Valium, Klonopin, clonazepam, Halcium. There's a lot of them. Anyways, benzodiazepines basically act on the same receptor sites as alcohol. And so you come off those abruptly, you put yourself in a withdrawal that can be a medical emergency. You can actually be put into seizures, high risk of seizures if you come off of alcohol and or benzodiazepines abruptly. And so there's a titration. Like, I worked in ICU, right? And we'd have real bad alcoholics that would be prescribed a beer with every meal because we know they aren't going to stop drinking. Again, they're self-medicating for trauma, right? And so they need to mitigate that in the hospital setting, and they recognize there's some problems that we can tackle, like a urinary tract infection, like high bilirubin, and there's some that are much more challenging to tackle, like um, a lifelong of alcoholism with an ACEs score of 10 or 11 max score, and we see that all the time in the ICU, right? Anything 3 or higher on your ACEs score, your adverse childhood experiences score, pretty much across the board will lead to depression and anxiety. Anything 5 or higher, pretty much across the board will lead to somatic stuff. That's body stuff. So fibromyalgia, chronic regional pain syndrome, Crohn's disease, the leaky bowel, I think I already said fibromyalgia. Everyone's got fibromyalgia. When you've got copious amounts of trauma or perceived trauma, I think that's super important. Trauma is very relative, and so intelligent and empathic people, they pick up more, and so validation of that is important. Name it to tame it, feel it to heal it, and make that internal narrative shift from this happened to me to this happened for me. Again, that's our treatment kind of cycle. That's what we try to work on at Revitalize Clinics. So no risk of serotonin syndrome with the ketamine treatments. And then 3, and no respiratory depression when ketamine is given by itself, right? It's on the World Health Organization's list of essential medications as an anesthetic. And because you can give orders of magnitude higher dosing without the deleterious effects that you can get with general anesthesia, other anesthetic agents like gases, benzodiazepines, opioids that are more commonly given in general anesthesia. And ketamine, like they say, it'll be on the first trip to Mars. You can in the field in Botswana, you can give 2 to 5 milligrams per kilogram, or in the field in the reservation, or in Kansas, or in a gentrified neighborhood. It doesn't really matter where you are. You can give high doses of ketamine very safely. We start people at our clinic based on a national guidance at 0.5 milligrams per kilogram over 45 minutes for most people. And there's a lot of nuances to treatment, so I don't want to qualify everything. And remember, while I am a psychiatric provider, chances are good that I'm not your psychiatric provider. And so, always talk to your psychiatric provider to find out more about what you should be doing. Don't take everything I'm saying as law, because it isn't. Individual, it's just like everything else, right? And we know that you can give 2 to 5 milligrams per kilogram all at once intramuscularly, do a C-section, do a leg amputation without any other agents, but without respiratory depression. It actually supports cardiovascular function. And so we normally see a rise in systolic blood pressure and most of the time in heart rate, which is good because it increases what's called your cerebral perfusion pressure, gets more of the ketamine across your blood-brain barrier, and increases neuroplasticity, which is a large part what ketamine and the other neuroplastogens, love that terminology, neuroplastogen, ego dissolution agent, psychedelic medicine, uh, whatever you want to call it, getting out of your own way, non-specific amplifiers of the human experience. So I think less is more, and you can get there through meditation, conscious human connection, cold plunging, physical activity, faith in God or something bigger than yourself. Uh, Lots of ways to get there. No one needs ketamine. Not great for business, but I tell people no one needs ketamine. And without some sort of catalyst like ketamine, it may take decades to get to a good headspace or get to a better headspace, if ever, without having some sort of catalyst to help you remember that empowerment. Again, very, very focused on that because that's what it's all about. That's what it should be. I'm not your healer. I'm turning the key and getting out of the way. So again, best bioavailability is the safest, it's the best efficacy profile that we know of. Again, traditional medications, like 10 to 30% effective long term. Think of mood super basically, right? As a waveform, depression, anhedonia, I don't care, is down here. Anxiety, hypervigilance, that kind of like, pucker state up here. People with trauma, they bounce back and forth a lot quicker between those two. And so pretty much all those medications I'd ever prescribe in traditional psychiatry, and I still prescribe them again. Nothing's inherently good or bad. SSRIs, SNRIs, mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, benzodiazepines, hypnotics, all, I would argue, about 10 to 30% effective long term, and simply squishing that waveform, making you maybe less depressed, maybe less anxious, maybe less stability, maybe less suicidality. As a side note, I think lithium as a salt, incredibly helpful. There's a large subsect or a large-ish and growing subsect of psychiatry community that believes lithium should be aerosolized and put in all sorts of ways for people to get it. There's a cool study where lithium was naturally occurring in the water supply, and that whole township had a significantly lower incidence of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation and completion than control cities without any lithium naturally occurring in the water supply. That being said, lithium orotate is kind of the move, in my opinion. Like 1 to 10 milligrams once a day at night. Uh, there's therapeutic dosing of lithium carbonate, which will be prescribed to you by a psychiatric provider. The latest evidence that I read really should be 1 time a day dosing with lithium because lithium's a giant salt and it taxes your kidneys. So if you're doing twice a day lithium dosing, check the latest research. The major mood benefits are you're still going to get that with once a day dosing, and you're also going to preserve renal function, kidney function, if you're doing it just once a day for much, much longer. And try to be the lowest therapeutic dosing possible. Consider switching to lithium orotate if you're at a safe space, a nutritional, high quality lithium orotate. Sold at like natural food stores and stuff. And again, a naturally occurring salt, really. It also goes in our batteries. I don't recommend breaking up with batteries or anything there. So ketamine and the other ego dissolution agents, I've done my own studies on lithium, or not on lithium, on ketamine infusion therapy. And I'm very clear that this is the intravenous version of ketamine with an induction series, so 6 infusions over a period of 3 weeks. We're looking at 70 to 95% efficacy as far as a reduction in depression and anxiety and troublesome symptomology. The higher amount, the 95%, is with suicidality. Oftentimes, suicidality gets much, much better. There's a really cool paper that came out about 2 years ago now, maybe a year and a half, where they stated that ketamine infusion therapy was not inferior to electroconvulsive therapy. ECT kind of gold standard. There's bilateral, unilateral stimulation where you're elucidating a seizure. I'm training ECT again. Shout out to my favorite preceptor ever, Jay Collier. He was an incredible provider. I learned a ton from him, and really good human. And so thank you, Jay. And thanks for everything you do for community at large. And thanks for taking me under your wing as a preceptor. I learned so much from you, man. Really appreciate you. And that unilateral bilateral stimulation. So bilateral stimulation elucidates often a more profound seizure activity, longer duration, and comes with significantly more cognitive issues afterwards. And so, again, that intelligence and empathy being a deadly combination, right? With ECT, we're seeing a ton of that as far as cognitive issues afterwards. Short-term memory issues, long-term memory issues, word finding issues, and it's incredibly helpful for depression and suicidality. So often done in an inpatient unit in a psychiatric unit. I think of like the reset button on the Nintendo Entertainment System or SNES, just clean everything out. So you paralyze a person, put them under general anesthesia, you put up a tourniquet on one of their lower extremities often, right or left, and then you put the paralytic in under general anesthesia, and then you elucidate the seizure with electrical current flowing across the brain. Again, I'm not into this anymore. I'd much rather see people who are struggling do the ketamine infusion therapy, and I'm trying to advocate for more people to have that availability of the ketamine infusion therapy because it's so dang effective. Again, 70 to 95% when you're looking at 10 to 30% effective uh, with traditional medications. ECT, pretty dang effective. Also, pretty dang barbaric and also pretty dang effective. So, ketamine infusion therapy, 70 to 95% effective. Traditional medications, 10 to 30% effective long term. There is, a loss of capture with ketamine. Obviously, like when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So I own a ketamine practice. So I'm not going to say I'm non-biased. And I can tell you, I'm trained in all the traditional modalities. And I am very much a proponent of less is more. And so after a series of 6 and a 1 month booster, like I tell people straight up, like, I don't want to see you again. There's enough people struggling out there that it's a real possibility and I don't have to worry about business. I wish I did. I'd love to be out of a job because I want everyone to be feeling a lot better than they do. And people do not feel great right now. There's a lot of people struggling out there that our digital leash, right? What like this connection, this false connection, while we're also very connected in other ways and very disconnected in other ways. So really challenging and frustrating and lots of room for improvement. So I don't think that the idea is to go back in time, right? We shouldn't all be living in teepees and, um, you know, living off the land with like 13 families. Like there's really cool stuff happening. I'm a cautious optimist by trade and by design, I think, in large part. And so I think that there's some really cool things happening, and life's about to get a lot better. There might be a small correction, might get a little worse before it gets better. And the biggest shift, I think we're on the precipice of the human evolution. The biggest shift in this new paradigm, Age of Aquarius, or whatever you want to call it, 2027, maybe Atlas C1A. I don't know. Lots of interesting stuff, right? That's a crazy rabbit hole. If you haven't gone down that one, oh my goodness. Um, that meteorite with random things and that solar flare phenomenon that's going to make it invisible right before it gets like really close to us. Coming up in December will be when it gets close to us. Into October to the end of November, like 3 week period of it basically being invisible. It has a front stuff. Like normally meteors on their tail, right? Their trajectory, like bits and particles come off and see it on the tail. This has a front energy being emitted, and it's crazy amount of cobalt or some other mineral that isn't normally in meteorites that are traveling like this. 12 billion year travel with It's a long one, but very interesting stuff, right? And so the biggest shift going into this newest paradigm, in my opinion, again, human optimism or cautious optimism. Don't learn from your past; you're doomed to repeat it. Be very clear about that. Is that we're going from that no because that scarcity based mindset, like no, because they said so, to that more abundance mindset. Yes, and so yes, that's a great political point. And I also don't think we should be killing babies. And so bananas to me how much we've dumbed down this whole us versus them mentality. I don't care what side of the political spectrum you're on. I really don't. I like you as a human being. I think what's good for you is good for the universe, and I'm really rooting for your success in all the ways. And the way that we define ourselves by Republican and Democrat really gets so dumbed down by these core issues. I don't think anyone wants to kill babies, and I don't think anyone is really like anti women's choice, and I don't think that certain people hate other people. I think that there's a lot of ego trying to protect us, right? Like we learn our emotional regulation skills, how to handle difficult people, difficult situations, and difficult emotions exclusively from our parents, pretty much from ages 0 to 11. Our peers, 12 to 19, romantic relationships, 19 and up. So if our parents weren't taught how to handle difficult people, difficult situations, or difficult emotions without blowing up or getting mad or getting sad or losing their cool or throwing things or punching walls, we should not be expected to be able to navigate those waters easily. That's why we have peers, and that's why we have romantic relationships, and that's why often opposites attract. It gives you that opportunity for a real deep healing. Really interesting. That's a lot of really cool stuff there. Relationship dynamics and Gottman method. There's some really awesome things I'd love to dive in deeper with. It's been a while since I recorded, so if you my excitement is palpable, it's because it is. I missed you guys. I hope that you've missed me too. I was fired up on this by a client. They said that they were like just binge listening to all my stuff. So I was like, oh, cool. Like, you like it. Yay, I'm getting positive feedback. Yay, it makes me feel good. I should create more. And so that's a good thing, right? We can cycle upwards and we can cycle downwards. And so I think it's awesome what we're capable of. And let's help each other out, right? You have way more in common with that other political party than you have been taught to believe. Right? So there's yes and right there. That's a big one. And there's room for improvement. There always is, right? No one's broken. We're all beautifully damaged. And it's all healable, all trauma. It's all integratable. It's all healable. And that's the whole paradigm of treatment with ego dissolution agents. It's way, 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 way less important what actually happens during your ego dissolution agent experience and or your journey, and way, 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 way more important what happens afterwards. What do you do afterwards? What's the integration? We really pride ourselves on that at Revitalize. That setting, and sustainability. Again, I want to see people less over time, not more. And that's, what we should be focusing on as medical providers. How do I help you to heal yourself? And that's empowerment. That's neuroplasticity. That's creating a healthy environment for yourself. That's reducing toxicity, right? I cover all of that. I think I've probably belabored those points in past episodes, so I'm not going to jump into that. And if you want to learn more about our program, please reach out. Remember, what's good for you is good for the universe. We really want to try to increase access to these things in transcranial magnetic stimulation, psychotherapy, medication management, uh, the stuff at Rock, like cold plunging, saunaing, red light therapy, or conscious human connection. Lots of ways to get there. No one needs ketamine. No one needs an ego dissolution agent. And so I get these tangents. You're welcome. One, reasons why that ketamine, intravenous ketamine, should be considered before any other ego dissolution agent, even if every other ego dissolution agent was available today. One, best bioavailability. Two, it's the safest. Three, it's the most efficacious. Four, and this one's important to me as a licensed psychiatric provider with a license that I worked really hard to get, it's the only version that's legal widely, right? At least right now. So that's super important. And then fifthly, and I think this is the most important for most people, particularly those people with trauma. In general, for most people though, it's the only version, again at this point, that you can pause. And so that keeps you and or your loved one and or who's considering ego dissolution agents, including ayahuasca and ibogaine and all these things, it keeps you in the driver's seat. You're in control. So you're like, hey, no, thank you. I do not want to be in here anymore. I am not ready to do this. Then boop, we pause that button. 2 to 5 minutes, you're back. Yay, we can talk through things. We can be like, hey, that sounded really hard. That sounded like a lot. That sounded like all of your worst trauma was coming out right there. That I wouldn't want that either. And I, again, am trained to be able to help people help themselves and be able to work through things like that occurring. And so doing it in office with good support is paramount, right? And so doing intravenous ketamine infusion therapy with a board certified provider that has a license to worry about, you hear about, or I hear about, all this secondary trauma of all these people that are shamans that are doing this work on people and then entering sexual relationships with them. And that's honestly a high risk with these longer acting ego dissolution agents in every capacity. So there's this term that's used, or terms that are used in psychiatry: transference and countertransference. Those are when you remind me of someone from my past, and I remind you of someone from your past, and we act accordingly. And when you're under the influence of an ego dissolution agent, those are heavily magnified. And when transference and countertransference are magnified, there's an opportunity for deep healing work. And there's an opportunity for a secondary trauma, right? And so I coined the term the intrinsic response methodology. The whole premise of this approach to treatment is that you will always be your own best healer. So my job is not to be your healer. I'm turning the key and getting out of the way, helping you remember how capable you've always been. And that is so important. And that really allows us to take a step back. That being said, that modality is challenging. There's a lot of nuances. My book is coming out shortly, soon. Thank you, Gerald. Thanks for your patience with me. My publisher, he's awesome and very patient with me. And there's a lot more nuances with longer acting ego dissolution agents. Ketamine, intravenous ketamine therapy, 45 minutes, right? 4 and 5. 45-minute infusion. There's pain infusions too, 90 minutes, double the dosing, double the time. Chronic pain infusions, 4 hours. There's a cool 72-hour infusion, very low dosing that really saturates those pain receptors. So the science of trauma, as far as psychiatric trauma and or mental spiritual trauma versus physical trauma, kind of different. You're really trying to saturate those opioid receptor sites when you are doing the physical trauma approach. And so those longer infusions are very interesting, cool stuff. Again, there's a Cedars-Sinai, I think was the first place I heard about doing them, where they inpatient a client. I'm sure any hospital could do it. Logistics of us doing it at a ketamine clinic, where it's an outpatient clinic, very challenging. If you do, that is the modality that you want to do look at, there's ways to make something like that happen. And so reach out if you're interested in doing that in a outpatient setting. Probably be, even with concierge care, significantly less expensive than a inpatient stay at Cedar Sinai, unless you can get insurance to take care of it somehow. Then obviously that's different. And 72-hour duration infusion, very low dosing. So we're not looking for that kind of psychedelic journey that we see often and viewed as a side effect in large part of the ketamine treatments. So again, I jumped into this. I got all excited. I probably brought up a bunch of past stuff that if you've listened to my stuff before, you're like, I heard that one, heard that one, heard that one, heard that one. And so sometimes I do that. It's been a while, and you're welcome. And if you're new, then there's probably a lot of value to be gained there. And if you're old, well, you're welcome. Ha. And so you aren't old. Age is just a number. It's fine. uh, so what I wanted to bring up, and one of the first things that I started down the pathway of, is Cybin's news release that they're entering their second phase, and they're seeing incredible results, like the robustness, the durability is what we often call it when we see how long a treatment lasts for. And so with the Cybin, when we get, it's like a derivative of psilocybin, and they're doing it intravenously, super cool stuff. And so they're entering phase 2 or phase 3 studies of the generalized anxiety disorder tract of Cybin. And they're seeing like a 26-month durability with major depressive disorder. That's huge. That's such a long time, right? That beats that 3-month window Brian Morescu was talking about or alluding to in the usage pattern of historical ego dissolution agent usage. And in the immortality key, secret history of religion with no name. And so, really interesting stuff. There's also this Keta RX. They're doing some stuff. They're actually pushing through generic ketamine for a treatment indication, which would normally be ill-advised, because what happens with a generic medication when it's pushed through for a treatment indication is that to go through the FDA trials to get a treatment indication, which Janssen did, thank you, Janssen, for showing how effective S-ketamine Spravato is as the S enantiomer of the ketamine molecule, the racemic S and R ketamine molecule, right? The S and R enantiomers of the ketamine molecule. If you did chemistry or organic chemistry, you remember there's a left-hand, right-hand glove. And the S enantiomer was supposed to have significantly less dissociative properties when they initially were deriving it. I think that isn't the case anymore when they isolate the S and the R. Interesting stuff about chemistry there, and when S-ketamine Spravato is looked at under a microscope, it seems like there's still some rods and chunks of both S and R enantiomers. So I'd like to hear more about that if any of the chemists have looked at that. And so while it's being marketed as an S enantiomer, chemists have shown that, so the R enantiomer may be biologically deactivated. I don't know. I'm not a chemist. And so anyways, they derived the S and R enantiomer as the ketamine molecule. They were able to get the patent on the S enantiomer, which is what most smart public corporations would do, because you're serving your shareholders. If there's anything that you're doing that doesn't serve your shareholders, which your primary reason for existing is to make them money. If you're doing something that isn't going to make them money, then they can sue you. You can take a big loss as a corporation if you're not serving your shareholders. And so Janssen, as a public-facing drug company, they should be trying to make money. And so they isolated the SNR and antidepressant ketamine molecule. They found out the S-ketamine molecule delivered to via and nasal spray was quite effective and beat sham and even beat traditional antidepressants in large ways. And we provide S-ketamine Spravato at our Revitalize clinics through insurance coverage, and it is quite effective, much more effective than traditional antidepressants, much less effective than intravenous ketamine effective treatments, and at a much higher burden overall to the healthcare system as far as costs. And that speaks to a bigger, you know, problem around the healthcare system. And I think the best change you can make to a system is from within it. And so, how can we potentially reduce taxpayer burden? Because that's what it ends up being, right? And or consumer burden, because you, as a consumer who is made to purchase a private insurance plan, has to pay a premium. And those premiums are elevated when the cost of a medication is quite high. And again, um, thank you, Jansen. Thank you for creating a wonderful drug. If you haven't watched Kids in the Hall movie, their full length feature film, Scott Foley, Dave Foley, Scott Anderson, I'm forgetting the Kevin. So those guys are awesome. My favorite movie ever, called Brain Candy, about a novel antidepressant and a sequela of that, including the drug development process. Obviously, very satirical, very tongue in cheek, and freaking hilarious, in my opinion. Thank you guys for creating comedic gold with that movie. Again, Brain Candy, super duper duper awesome, amazing, magical. Um, then you should watch that. And I highly recommend watching Brain Candy, the movie, if you're anywhere involved in this space. And particularly those people in the drug development process, because I think you'll get a kick out of it. I certainly do. I watch it every 6 months or so. Hard to find. Oftentimes, if you're finding it on Blu-ray, it's the only place you can find it. I think Amazon had it for a little while. Okay, Brain Candy. Brain Candy, I'm back. Important phone calls. Your family comes first. Don't you forget that. And there's a lot of room for improvement in all aspects. We're all works in progress, including the drug creation process. I'm part of a drug startup. I've been told not to discuss anything around it, so I'm leaving it alone. And there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of cool stuff happening out there, and there's a lot of room for improvement. And anything we can do to move the needle, super helpful. So again, thank you, Jansen, for creating a wonderful drug. And thank you for bringing the public's perception online about how effective even simply the S enantiomer of the ketamine molecule is for treatment-resistant depression, for acute suicidality. Those are treatment indications that the S enantiomer on its own has. And racemic ketamine, SNR enantiomer ketamine molecules, what we give at Revitalize Clinics in the intravenous, intramuscular forms and oral troches, intranasal sprays in all off-label usage, to be very clear about that, off-label, is, and that's what I've started with this KetaRx discussion rabbit hole, is that they're more effective. Racemic is more effective. That's what I've seen. And that's what I've experienced, and that's what my clients experience at a lower cost often. And to get a treatment indication, to have insurance cover anything that we're doing with racemic ketamine is off-label, and thereby insurance companies do not cover it. So KetaRx, this company out of Florida, I believe, they've been buying up ketamine clinics, and their objective, from what I understand from listening to the CEO and founder, he's been in drug reform policy stuff for a while, and they seem very much they want to make a lot of money. Their idea, from what I understand, and I could be way off base here, so if someone has conflicting information, please relay that to me so I don't sound like an idiot, is that what they're doing is they're putting racemic, again, generic, off-label, on the World Health Organization's list of essential medications, ketamine, through the FDA approval process for treatment-resistant depression, which again is hundreds of millions of dollars often to get a treatment indication based on the rigorous requirements that the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, requires for a study to meet the requirements for a drug to be shown as both safe and effective. And they, KetRx, this company, and that might not be their name, or maybe what they're calling their version of ketamine, which I think they're taking away a commonly used stabilizer, and so it has a much shorter shelf life, and they are patenting the drug. They're patenting the drug ketamine, the generic drug ketamine. And their plan is to, once they get the treatment indication for treatment resistant depression, and they get the patent awarded and approved for generic ketamine, that they are going to um, make a cease and desist letter for all um, generic ketamine providers and thereby control the generic ketamine supply. So that's kind of something waiting in the wings that could negatively affect a lot of ketamine clinics like myself, and really put a stranglehold on how we deliver care. And so again, I don't know what'll happen, but that's another player in the space. Cybin, again, they found a derivative of psilocybin, basically the most active compound, much lower dosing, like 12 and 24 milligram dosing is what they're using of cybin intravenously, with again a 24-month durability, again treatment response to depression. That's awesome. Wonderful. I love it. There's also Sue Sicily down in the Valley. She's got a Schedule 1 license. Dr. Chung in the Valley, he's got a Schedule 1 license. My friend Ramy Drozd is applying for Schedule 1 licensure. And we've even looked at connecting with some research-based places so that we can get a schedule. So the Schedule 1, Schedule 2, Schedule 3, right? And then beyond that, I don't know because I don't remember, but Schedule 4, Schedule 5, those things that really have no danger. So Schedule 1 are drugs with no medical uses and high risk for diversion and abuse. And so basically all illegal drugs are Schedule 1. And so I think nationally marijuana is a Schedule 1. And hemp is very dangerous, right? uh, as a side note, marijuana seems to be relatively safe. It does reduce neuroplasticity, and so less is more of that as well. Less is more of everything again. And then what was I going on that one? Marijuana. So Schedule 1, and then Schedule 2. And so like cocaine Schedule 1, LSD Schedule 1, psilocybin Schedule 1, you know, like weird circumventions to this, right? Like bath salts, cybin, derivatives of psilocybin. Chemically, they're different but similar, act similarly. Bath salts, I don't recommend those. Things you can find at a head shop because they're chemically different than the Schedule 1. They're in this gray zone where they can be marketed and sold to our youth, which is super fun. That's great. Yay. So, I'm just kidding. That's not great. There's lots of inherent dangers when you're trying to game a system. So Schedule 1, again, no medical usage at this point. There's the war on drugs, right? And so this is, again, why I haven't used ketamine treatments. If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it. A lot of people in my space right now are saying, hey, you need to use ego dissolution agents. There's a big push for ketamine training programs. There's an experiential component. While not mandatory, we highly recommend that you do the experiential component. I disagree with that mindset. I feel like if we're going to be providing these treatments in an ethical, safe space, if you're depressed and I'm prescribing you an SSRI, I don't need to take that SSRI to tell you that, hey, like the evidence supports this works. And so same thing with antibiotics. You've got a lung infection, bad pneumonia, and I know vancomycin works. So, well, let me try it. I'm not going to do that. And so I think if we're ethically based, mental health providers and or physical health providers, that if I can come at it with curiosity, then that's better. We all bring our own trauma into every interaction, right? And so
uh, if I had this best, beautiful, most wonderful ketamine experience ever, or this most terrible, like, relive all the worst trauma of my life, or just dark and black, which I've seen all of those and many other ways of experience the ketamine treatments, then I'm inherently going to think, at least slightly subconsciously, or have a bias that the people that I'm giving the treatments to, they are also going to have that kind of experience. And so I bring my bias of wow, this is going to be really fun for you, or I don't know, you might not want to do this. It wasn't very fun for me. And so having that kind of inherent knowledge of these all ego dissolution agents, they won't give you what you want. They will give you what you need. And that's true of I've facilitated thousands of journeys now. Oh my gosh. Most rewarding work of my life. I get the chills pretty much every day I work, watching people let go, watching people figure out, watching people actually figure it out, watching people feel good, watching people let those walls down safely. I like to say, feel safe to feel safe, and feel safe to feel unsafe. So powerful. And so Schedule one drugs all got lumped together. And again, this part, if you don't learn from this, you're doomed to repeat it. A lot of researchers, a lot of clinicians in the 1960s, 1970s, huge body of evidence coming out about how effective all ego dissolution agents were. Curative for depression, curative for anxiety, curative for PTSD, curative for alcohol use disorder. Um, and and so what at least I saw in part when I'm looking back at the history, a lot of the researchers, a lot of clinicians started getting high on their own supply, started touting these treatments as this panacea, as this cure-all. They are not a panacea. They are not a cure-all. Much less important what happens during your treatment, much more important what you do afterwards, the integration. That's where the rubber hits the road. That's where the magic happens. Again, that's where we pride ourselves on at Revitalize. And so what you do after, way more important. And that being said, these researchers, these clinicians in the 1960s, 1970s, very vocally proponents of ego dissolution. What was it? The dropout, drop acid, dropout, and I don't remember something else. I do agree that a lot of education is proving that you can jump through hoops. There's a norming school. One of my sauna episodes, Joel and I jumped into that. Very interesting stuff, and there's a lot more there where we aren't teaching kids how to think. We're teaching them how to be good employees. And so recognizing the room for improvement, and trying to help people help themselves. So clinicians started getting high on supplies, started joking about slipping ego dissolution agents into water supplies, slipping it to politicians without their knowledge. Those researchers, those clinicians lost their credence as non-biased researchers, non-biased clinicians. And thereby, I think, at least in part, when the inevitable other foot dropped of this kind of capitalistic, consumeristic model of, buy more, use more, think less, that dropped, which will inevitably happen again. Those researchers, those clinicians didn't have any feet to stand on, and they couldn't be looked to as non-biased resources. And so, at least at this point in my career, what I'm doing for my own mental health is working. If that did stop working, I would get in line for these treatments way before I would traditional antidepressants. And again, the less is more mentality. And so, really important to bring that up, because when the Reagan Nixon era happened, the war on drugs, the ego dissolution agents, which again, very low risk of danger, that David Nutt study I referred to earlier, all the ego dissolution agents, very, very safe in large part. Matthew Perry, people like to cite his, he was on Suboxone, and had like 30 or 40 doses of intramuscular and subcutaneous and oral ketamine, and then went swimming by himself, which we don't recommend any of those things. And so, tragic case. And he was suffering for a long time. I listened to his audiobook about a year before his tragic demise, and he's been in a rough spot, intelligence and empathic in spades, I think. And, very um, took advantage of the system and probably paid that penance of being like taking advantage of other people, particularly women, somewhat of a womanizer. And I bet he carried that, and that hurt him, the fact that he let himself do that. And that's what his book led me to believe. I think that he's, again, intelligent and empathic. And so that's what drives people to put these walls up, to build this fortress, right? And so people can take like daily, multiple times a day doses of ketamine and come off it abruptly without any physiological withdrawal symptomology, like you can get with opioids, benzodiazepines, even marijuana, definitely alcohol. It can be a medical emergency, again, as I referenced earlier, coming off of benzodiazepines or alcohol from a heavy use pattern abruptly. Seizures and die, lose your gag reflex and puke and die and seize and all these things that, like, I saw that when I was working community mental health. And so recognition that this has already happened before, we've been here before, we recognized that all these ego dissolution agents were super helpful. We had less, I think, big pharma being involved, so that's exciting, that's new, right? And in big pharma even says, hey, like, we want to help people, we want to find these cures, bigger dose, big people pay more, right? And so great, like, cool, like, that's awesome. And let's be responsible, let's be ethical about our delivery here. uh let's keep it sacred in that we're doing it on purpose, right? And so, again, everything in moderation, including moderation. If your purpose, if your intention, bringing intentionality is so important with this kind of medicine, is to dance and have fun with your friends in the right setting, that could be really cool. And again, that goes back to tribal kind of environment and breaking bread and ceremony, and oftentimes emotionality will come to the surface because it's safe to come to the surface. As an ego dissolution agent, I like to say, zoom out far enough, you can find the gift. Think of that movie Inside Out, right? When they're cutting through, I think, the hippocampus, and they turn from their normal caricatures into those lights and shapes and colors. And so that's how people will parcel through, their in utero trauma, their birth trauma, their pre-concrete memory trauma, really gnarly stuff that happened that their conscious brain doesn't want to think about, doesn't want to put images to or feelings to. And so, ketamine infusion therapy, you can parcel through like war trauma or sexual trauma or physical trauma as like lights and shapes and colors and feeling stretching. It doesn't have to suck to be therapeutic, which is super cool. Again, you're shaking that snow globe. Think of the depression, the anxiety, the substance use disorder, the hypervigilance at those sled tracks. Go down a sled track a couple times, gets pretty hard lined. Go down a million times, it's like a toboggan trail, almost impossible to get off of. Within 2 or 3 minutes of starting a ketamine infusion, and the other ego dissolution agents work similarly, it would seem. On a functional MRI, we see new dendrites forming, those synaptic connections. And when you do the induction series with the single booster infusion, it's like 5 feet of fresh fallen snow. And so that ability to quite literally change your mind, very much energy in, energy out. Again, setting, and sustainability. So that set, that's how you come into the treatment, like that mindset. That's why we do the integration workbook. That's why we talk people through intention setting and environment and flight instructions. And then the setting, being in a clinical environment that also has, very therapeutic elements and comfortable while also monitoring your vital signs and keeping you safe. I think that's the setting to do it in, especially when you're brand new to all of this. And then sustainability. Again, we want to see people less over time, not more. What is good for you is good for the universe. And so MDMA, ecstasy, that was looking like it was going to become available, mid last year. We got kind of some preliminary, hey, this might not happen. Oh, another phone call. I love you. Lots of interruptions. That's okay. Again, family comes first. So I was talking about MDMA, and I was talking about what kind of happened. Writing was on the wall a little bit. MAPS, wonderful organization. And the way they were trying to do it, very grassroots. I love Rick Doblin, rad dude, cool human, and has been plugging away at this stuff for a long time. Wanted to make it, very sustainable, and provide a lot of guidance, and harped on the importance of the therapy, which I think is the right move, and was trying to bring it to fruition based on the therapy model. And that's really hard with our current FDA kind of way of doing things. And so I would say yes, and you should consider doing just the molecule, and then building as part of the REMS what that integration may need to look like. It's more challenging. The nuances there again. Drug development is really interesting, and there's a lot to it. And so they were trying to patent, or I mean, not patent is the right word, but they were trying to bring it to the masses, an incredible efficacy. But MDMA is awesome, empathogen versus a true psychedelic. So very little perceptual distortion and much more heart opening in a lot of ways. And it's a stimulant, so it's not safe for everybody. Um, and there's a depletion. You can mitigate a lot of that with supplementation. And so what we saw in the psychiatric community was there was an advisory board meeting prior to the actual hearing, and the advisory board was like, hey, we got some issues here. And then based on those issues, the actual hearing was like, hey, we can't go through with this. There's too much unknown and too much potential danger. And a big part of it was that transference and countertransference. Mass tried to mitigate that. And I think there's probably some really good thinking here, in that anytime you are working with a client, that's the great thing about ketamine infusion therapy. Again, it's like 45 minutes, very clean on, clean off. With a lot of the longer acting ego dissolution agents, including MDMA, psilocybin, ayahuasca, Ibogaine, Ibogaine is like a 22-hour ride. Again, I talked about that transference and countertransference, very amplified. And so what happened was, there was an incident in the clinical trials of a chronically sexually traumatized individual entering a sexual relationship with their MAPS certified therapist, obviously frowned upon. And so that was a big part of why it didn't come to fruition. And it speaks to larger why longer ego dissolution agents, not given in a tribal type environment, given in a more clinical environment, are going to come with a lot of pitfalls. And so it's really important to me as a board certified psychiatric provider to, again, deliver these treatments very ethically. And so, that's a conversation that I feel like should be on the tips of everyone's tongues who is like a mover and shaker in this field right now, in that we need to be very, 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 very ethical with our delivery models and how we treat ourselves, our coworkers, and our clients. I'm never going to, as a business owner, have a hard line that our staff needs to have any sort of working knowledge themselves of what ketamine feels like, or other ego dissolution agents for that matter. And nor is my position, nor should other clinicians have that as a hard line. Again, non-specific amplifiers of the human experience. Some people are so God-fearing that they're always plugged in. It's about remembering, right? It's about this safety. And that comes with this deep remembrance that you don't need ego dissolution agents to get to. And that's my stance. And that's, really important, I think, to reiterate. It really helps with the empowerment too, because, been in psychiatry for a long time, is that we all do so much pedestalizing of other people's expectations of us, right? I saw it all the time. People come into my office as a psychiatric provider. Hey, so-and-so, how's it going? And they're like, oh, I'm great, Casey. I'm like, no, you're not, right? You're here on purpose. And so just that recognition that we all put on this mask, right? That ego to protect ourselves. And sometimes that mask looks like depression. Sometimes it's anxiety. Sometimes it's being really, really jovial and fun and the joke maker. And sometimes it's being a butthead, right? And it's all born on purpose. So again, name it to tame it, feel it to heal it. And ultimately, all working towards that, making that internal narrative shift from this happened to me to this happened for me, right? And so there's other stuff going on, the Keta RX, the Cybin late stage studies, 5-MeO IV form. There's other cool stuff, cool ketamine hybrids, or combination drugs. Auvelity's there already. There's cool stuff happening. And I see that it's getting dark and I am going to sign off. So I know it's been a while since I've done an episode, and I appreciate all of you sticking with me, and thank you to that individual who listened to my episodes and said that, hey, like, there's value here. Thank you for creating this. And that fired up my stoke and made me wanted to do another one. So thanks for listening. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for hanging out this long. Hopefully there was some nuggets that you enjoyed out of this. And remember, what's good for you is good for the universe. This is Casey Dubravcic, owner and founder of Revitalize Ketamine Clinics and Rocked Wellness Bar. Revitalize, optimize, and harmonize your entire life. Remember, what's good for you is good for the universe. Today we talked about all sorts of cool stuff, and I'm here in case you have any questions, comments, concerns. If you want to book a consultation, reach out. Check out our website, www.revitalizeketamine.com. Mental wealth moves, because the best investment you can ever make is in yourself. Make it a great day.